I'm so excited. It's your Friday afternoon pickup. I'm so excited to have a neighbor, a local here from Baton Rouge, Steve Mellor. Steve, welcome.
Well, I'm so excited to be here, Beth. And again, it's beautiful to be sharing this Friday afternoon with you. And again, a Baton Rouge native too. It's awesome.
That's right. Well, you're from England, so if anyone hears your accent, it's an
That's
honest and authentic accent,
right.
correct?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's been,
So,
well, I was just going to say, every time I introduce myself now, I'm British born, Baton Rouge based. That's just how
yeah.
I like to say it. It's makes it easier for people just to understand like what I start saying is going to sound real different to what most people say around here.
And it's so funny because you can move to Baton Rouge, but it takes a minute to become an actual native. You got to
Right.
really work your way through all the things and
That's
the
right.
places and the people. But but yeah. So today we're going to talk about growth and leadership and coaching and a lot of things that I think people hear about, but sometimes maybe have some experience with, maybe sometimes wonder what it's like. But you got into coaching via athletics, which is, the ultimate place to coach. So let's
Mhm.
talk about that and what that means to your executive coaching today.
Yeah, I love the question because to be honest with you, the transition from sports into what I'm doing now came with so much imposter syndrome. Again, you're walking into boardrooms, you're walking into businesses, you're just sitting down having coffee with someone who doesn't have any background in sport whatsoever, and you're going to start pitching yourself as a coach and trying to emphasize how it is you can be of service and impact. And my sport was swimming. I was in swimming for 15 years as a coach, the 10 to 11 years before that as an athlete. So we're talking about, the better part of 2.5 decades. I was immersed in this sport, mainly at the highest level too. How I ended up in Baton Rouge was because of swimming. Coached at LSU for almost 10 years. And for me, the interesting part about it is that my philosophy with coaching when I was coaching athletes in many ways was no different to what I'm doing now because my focus was on the human. It was never about the athlete. And some people hear that and they go, I don't know, man, I can't necessarily believe that. And it's like, well, you only need to go and ask my athletes. The one thing that I always did with them was take the time to get to know the human being that was going to be stepping on the block and diving into the pool. Because for
Mm-hmm.
me as a coach, that was kind of my inside track to actually developing and realizing their potential. Was the better I knew them, and in some
Mm-hmm.
cases it would scare them. Like I would almost get to know them in a way that they didn't even know themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That ability for me to then serve them truly as the optimal coach was something that I saw as a huge advantage. And it was a small sacrifice I saw on my part just to say, hey, find the 5 minutes, find the 10 minutes when they need that 5 or 10 minutes, invest in the individual. And
Mm-hmm.
before long, everything they're hearing from you as the swim coach, it's being heard and it's resonating with them on a deeper level because you have a greater connection with them from the beginning.
Yeah. So, what do you tap into to get deeper? Because I think people are really good with a flyby approach to,
Mm.
people know me, people know who I am, but it takes a minute to get deeper. And I think people are looking and longing for that deeper, whether it be at home, whether it be in an athletic situation or a coaching corporate situation. What does it take for us as people to realize that we really do need to know people better to have better relationships?
For something you're getting to here, which I think is so important, is we have that desire for the depth. We have that desire for the connection. And to your initial point, it takes time. It isn't something you can just do in passing down the hall. I know you work with leaders and business owners much like I do. And one thing I am very passionate about is integrating the concept of coaching into a style of leadership. And the first thing I share with any room that I'm speaking to on this is that it starts with creating what we call a shared space in the world of coaching. And a shared space is not walking down the hall or in the staff room or outside in the parking lot. That is not a shared space. A shared space is an intimate setting. It is a place where nobody can distract you and your undivided attention can be on the individual right in front of you. And that's part of that psychological safety and psychological agreement around the work that you and I do. And so for me, it's like, hey, are you willing to invest in the time to create these shared spaces? And one of my favorite terms that I get to use today is, what are you then doing to protect that? Like, are
Mm-hmm.
you actually ensuring that the 15 minutes. And sometimes that's all it is. Like it just needs to be 15 minutes, but are you protecting that 15 minutes, or are you finding a way to say, oh, something came up, I can no longer meet with you now. And it's the same excuse, the same time, every single time. If you're truly committed to this, you will always protect that time. You will honor those shared spaces in a way so a person can be seen, a person can feel heard, and then you can start to build that depth of the relationship over time.
That's so well said. I have a phrase I like to use, and it's commit to your commitments. And
Right.
I find that people don't. Some people do. I think that, you get a better offer pretty much every day if you've made a commitment to have a coffee or a lunch with someone and then something better comes up. You're better off sticking with your commitment, right? Because your word is your word. And if you ever hope to have that depth, it's built around trust and availability. Is that true?
100%. And it's so hard for you think about our worlds as business owners. We want to say yes, right? We want to say yes to everybody. And
Yeah.
and something you learn really quick in this space is if you keep saying yes to everybody, the person that's going to get exposed quickly the most is yourself.
Yeah.
And that's that. And it's no different in leadership. If you keep trying to say yes to things, that means you're probably going to have to cancel something else or move something else, and someone else is going to be frustrated. And before you know it, that someone else turns into many people, and you're the one who's getting exposed in the long term.
Well, so let's talk about that, because you talk about your potential and developing your potential. I have a phrase I use: better me, better we. You go to church or you go to a meeting and you're like, if only they would hear, this person would hear that message, then
Mhm,
they would be better and then I would be better. But
mhm.
I have found the more emphasis I put on the stronger me, then the byproduct of that is stronger we's in every single situation. And that's because I'm being true to myself.
Mm.
I think, for instance, I'm going to work out, I don't work out. Who's upset with who? I'm upset with me. So, in realizing your potential, how important is that we really accept who we can become?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wrote a book all about realizing your potential, and so for me, at the heart of that is this thing I call the optimal self. And it's funny because I've used it naturally. You hear it a lot in anything when I'm marketing myself, etc., and when I'm speaking on a stage. But the moment I start working with a client, it's typically like 2 or 3 sessions in, and they go, "You're kind of this whole optimal self thing. It's a real thing. Like this isn't just something you're using to entice people or bring people in." I'm like, it's not, because at the end of the day, if we get the optimal self right, we create this North Star. And the beauty of a North Star, Beth, is we never get there. We never reach the North Star, but
Hmm.
it is a sign in the sky. It is a direction that we get to pursue. And then it's the actual enjoyment and the fulfillment that we get from the process and the work each and every day, to simply just acknowledging, like, there's this version of me that I truly believe is optimal.
Yeah.
And if I can be kind enough to myself to understand that there's probably never going to be a day where I truly emulate that version of me 100%. But if I can just say, you know what, I think this life is better lived if I'm just pursuing that version of me, as opposed to looking backwards and maybe just being frustrated about something that's been and gone and being so caught up in that, when really there's this always this version of ourselves that we can be aspiring toward. And I've seen it so much in the world of sport. You can't necessarily get an athlete sometimes to see that, and so they become their biggest self-critic. And as a
Right.
coach, then your job is just to say, stop being so harsh on yourself and just focus on this version of you that you can become, and enjoy the ride, enjoy the process that comes with the work required to pursue that version of you. But at the end of the day, take the time to define and describe what that optimal self looks like, and
Yeah.
then start to invest in that process to truly pursuing it, under the idea that, I may never get there, but it's way more worth it to go about it that way.
So what are the markers that lead you to believe you're not your optimal self? I mean, what are the
Mm.
things where you're like, okay, that's a red flag. I need to pay attention to that. What are the
Yeah.
things that help us to be able to say, okay, I need to work on A, B, C?
Yeah, and again, you'll forgive me for not necessarily going A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3, but just focusing more on the singular and the one. And for me, I think our bodies are our greatest voice, but for whatever reason, we're pretty terrible at listening to them. And it's just the way it's always been for a long, long time. Our bodies know intuitively when something's off. it's then on us to decide, am I going to listen to myself right now, or am I just going to continue to squash it and push it to one side and act like there's no problem here? And for me, like that was all the major junctures in my journey came with me having the ability just to say, listen to what your body's telling you. Your body's not happy. Your body's frustrated. Your body's been in this cycle of misery, of even depression. Do you want to just stay there? Do you want to just allow that to be? Or do you want to listen to it because your body's actually crying out to you right now to make a change and make a shift? And so for me, I have a couple of techniques. I mean, to almost honor that 1, 2, 3 and an ABC approach. It's for me, I have a couple of techniques each and every day. I call it my first and final 30. So the first 30 minutes every day, what are you doing in that first 30 minutes to set yourself up for a great day? And then what are you doing in the final 30 minutes to simply look back and say, what did I achieve today? What do I need to do better tomorrow? And the way I always describe it, Beth, is those 30 minutes, if you do it right, that hour when you add it together is the most control you have in your entire day. Because outside of those 30 minutes, either at the bookends, you're on somebody else's clock, your everything you're doing is dependent on so many other people around you. We can control that 1 hour of our day if we choose to. And typically that's my time to tune in and say, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, Steve, where are we at? What's going on? What do we need to be aware of?
And then follow that through with the real answer and not pretend it's one thing, but be able to say, and I think this is, a friend of mine says the biggest gap in life is between knowing and doing. I mean, we know what to do, but we
Right.
just have to do it.
That's right. That's right. I love
We
that.
know to work out, we know to drink more water, we know all those things, but I think realizing your potential is investing in yourself enough to say, I know what to do. I may not get it all right, but I'm going to do more than I don't.
That's right. That's right. And we get to see that up front and personal every day when we coach. Is
Yeah.
our job as coaches is like, hey, I'm just helping. I'm really a mirror. I'm just a mirror that you're investing in. And it's a mirror that has a voice and has some intuition that can guide you. But at the same time, the development and the growth that you're experiencing, it's coming from inside of you. It's coming
Yeah.
from inside of you. You just need some help bringing it out and some accountability around it too.
Yeah. And I also think too, we have a lot of voices. Uh, we have a lot of voices. I mean, we have somebody said the other day, if you want to do the wrong thing, just ask a lot of people what you should
I
do.
love that. Yeah.
But the truth is we do have to be able to turn down the noise because
Mhm.
there's a lot of people that have a lot of opinions. A lot of people think they know what we should do, what we could become, what we should do next. But
Mhm.
the truth is, and you have to be able to sit down in that quiet 30 minutes in the morning, whether it's prayer time, quiet time, whatever, and say, who am I and where am I going? And then answer the question. Don't just think it, then answer the question, right?
Exactly, exactly. And again, like that, I'm a man of faith, and I actually just went on a walk right before this, a little bit of 15-minute prayer and listening to some stuff on my phone, and some of the insights that I was getting is just around like, hey, how are you simply being that light for people in your world right now? That this was the particular prayer that I was just focused on today. And for me, like part of that is to everything that we're speaking to is like, okay, if I'm going to be that light for others, in many ways, it's how am I being that example of what I preach? Here I am
Yeah.
preaching this and coaching on this. I need to be front and center saying like, hey, my body's told me this the last 2 days, and this is what I'm doing about it. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not just going to sit with that information and ignore that information. I'm going to be that light, that example to the all the many people that we get to interact with and blessed to interact with all the time, and show them what that way may look like.
And I think too, in a coaching situation, one of the things that's such a bonus for both people is a safe space to be honest
Hmm.
and to be able to say what you really think and what you really want to ask. And I
Hmm.
think we have to let's kind of talk about that for a minute because we got to create the cultures where the people that are in our life and in our work and in our home feel connected truly to one another. So culture is a big deal at work, culture is a big deal at home. How do you look at the places that you go the most and say, well, this culture needs, kick it up a notch or turn it down a bit? I mean, how do we, analyze the environments that we step into so that we can say, here's a change that needs to be made? Because I think we have to follow through with these things.
For sure, for sure. I think, just speaking it from our perspective in our work, I think what's crucial is that we don't make it about us. I think it's you see so many cultures and you see what's worked somewhere else, and that you cannot help but feel that inner voice kick in when you see certain practices happening, and you go, "Oh, I've seen this before. They need to know this. I'm going to tell them that this is what they need to know." And intuitively, there may be a lot about that decision that makes sense and is correct, but what we're trying to do with all culture is create enough traction and enough momentum where it can exist without an outside source like us. We want to be able to set it off on its way, and then for it to maintain itself and grow itself over time. So the
Hmm.
earlier that culture can actually discover from within and have these realizations for themselves,
Hmm.
the more ownership they're going to take around the way they go and apply those things too. And so
Hmm.
I think one thing that we have to get right on the front end with culture is to be patient. It's just to be patient and say, listen, that there's no denying that there's things that we can improve right now. But if we throw a solution at every single problem from the outset,
Hmm.
that doesn't work. It just doesn't. Culture is progressive. Culture is something that takes time, but at the heart of it, it must be owned from within.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to help those people somehow see things for themselves and come to these awarenesses on their own, then
Hmm.
you're always going to be somewhat short of what the potential of that culture can be. So that's one of my favorite things to do at first, is just to simply listen to people and hear what it is they're dealing with and get a better understanding of the situation before then asking the kind of powerful questions that can serve their own discovery and in turn serve the growth of the culture itself.
Well, and added to that, you talk about a community of purpose. It's very important that people feel like what they're doing matters.
Hmm.
And I think we see a lot of, grass is greener on the other side because people want to go to that place where,
Hmm.
it matters if you show up at work. It matters if you're on this team. So creating a culture, a community of purpose, how do we do that? Because that implies everyone matters. And a lot of times people don't feel like maybe they do unless they're the boss.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that term up that I do use a lot in my work, and the the interesting part about these words that we use when I say something like community of purpose, people are either drawn to the word community or they're drawn to the purpose based
Mhm.
on whatever position they find themselves. If they're longing for one or the other, they typically gravitate toward, oh yeah, well, I'd love to develop community, or yeah, I'd love to develop purpose. And the reason why I believe the two go hand in hand is that the community piece is always going to be the environment we want to create. So that's the holistic nature of culture. The purpose is on the individual. What is that individual feeling as though they can actually contribute? So typically when I do this work with organizations, the leaders that come to me and they're just like, talk to me about purpose. The first thing that I'm hearing when they say that is that they feel as though there's more that they can be bringing as an individual, as a leader. If they're gravitating towards the purpose part, anybody that gravitates towards the community piece typically tells me that for whatever reason, they feel pretty good about the way they are showing up. They're just having a hard time bringing other people along for the ride. And
Yeah.
so it's very much two-sided and there's two parts to it. But I think if I had to sort of say, where do we start with between the two? For me, it has to always start with the individual, which means purpose is the piece that we have to get right on the front end, because the community typically, once everyone starts showing up with greater purpose, the community for that starts to really take care of itself. And purpose, I've always said, starts with intentionality. And if we get, in order to have intention, we need direction. So for that individual to say, hey, this is where I am right now, this is where I want to get to, I'm really clear about that. Now let's start doing some work around how we get there. Suddenly we're now developing that intentionality. And if they're showing up with intention every day and they're given the space to be intentional, purpose will slowly become a result of that work as well.
So shift a little bit with me and let's talk about communication.
Sure.
One of the things I say a lot is, and you tell me if you see this to be true. Most people don't talk about what most people need to talk about. Certainly true in a business setting. When I was hiring people full time, someone would come in looking for a job, and I would say, "Well, did you tell your person you're leaving?" "Well, no." "Well, okay, so there's the lack of engagement that's already
Mhm.
happening right there. As a leader, is it true that if you're a boss, maybe not a new boss, but if someone comes in and says, well, I'm leaving, I'm going somewhere else, that should not come as a surprise to a team member. Is that true? Because the conversations and communications should be on the table. Is that safe to say?
Yes, if we're doing what we need to be doing to be an effective leader, 100%. And
Right.
I think the problem is that does come as a surprise all too often to a lot of leaders,
Hmm.
because in from their perspective, through their lens, communication is as much as it can possibly be. They're
Hmm.
doing everything they can in their power to communicate effectively, or so they tell themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble, is that we don't exhaust what communication looks like. We don't put enough identity into communication specific to the organization and specific to the people within it. Because again, communication is one of those words that is based on experience. It's not something you just pull from the dictionary and everybody has this understood shared
Hmm.
definition of how we show up and see communication. The way whenever I talk about growth with an organization, with an audience now, I always go to that fact, is that growth is not the definition that you pull from the dictionary. Growth is the experience that you've had in your life that has brought you to this point. That's how you see growth, and everybody in the audience therefore sees growth differently. It's no different when it comes to communication. So for that leader to assume coming in and just communicate the way they've always communicated, they're leaving themselves very vulnerable to not being understood and being misunderstood by so many of the people that they're leading, because they don't probably see communication the same way they do. So leaders have decisions to make when it comes to communication. What does it mean to define it? And then how do we get everybody consistent with what communication means within the team?
And I think it loops back to that, what you said earlier, that 5 minutes, maybe that 15 minutes of face to face time
Mm,
where that person feels like, okay, I've been able to say, in 5 years, I want to be here. What's it look like for me to earn that? Then that person then has a job description and they're able to then go from that. So,
mm,
yeah, I think communication is an art, it's a skill, but it's a learned skill,
mm,
and anyone can learn that. It's just about talking about what I think needs to be talked about. So,
absolutely.
um, let's talk about growth ready.
Mhm.
You're That's your business. You're helping people be growth ready. What does that look like at home? You're a family man, you're a
Yeah,
husband, you've got kids. We're all either going forwards or going backwards. I mean,
that's
there's
right.
just no such thing as sitting still. So
Yeah.
how do we understand that and say, man, I'm either growing or I'm going backwards, I don't want to go backwards.
Yeah.
How do we embrace that and say, this is good, this is not bad?
Yeah, and I love the question, because again, what it allows me to do is just kind of explain. Like, I love that you've asked it me through the lens of just the person that I am at home every day, because that's one of the many areas of my life. That's one of the jugs, if you will, that I pursue fulfillment around, in terms of how I show up and do what I do every day. And one thing I always tell people is, like, when it comes to growth, it isn't one dimensional. It isn't this one, like when I work with a business owner, sure, they hire me at first to say, hey, how do we grow as a business? And that's great. That's one column to sort of look at it through. But over the work, suddenly we realize, in order to serve the business's growth, we need to serve our individual growth. And if we're going to serve our individual growth, we need to look at that through the lens of the professional, the person, the brother, the sister, the father, the husband, the daughter, the mother, whatever it is. There's so many facets to how and when we grow. And depending on the season that we're in life too, there's going to be things growing at a fast rate, while some things are barely growing, but you just need to kind of keep it ticking over. And for me, that's where I always have to get to the heart of. Again, I mentioned that earlier, is how do we define growth? What's that one? When I say growth, what's that one word that comes to you straight away when I say the word growth? And I ask audiences this all the time, and I get 50 different answers every single
Mhm.
time. And for me, when I look at my growth as a husband, as a father, each and every single day, I look at that as just pure curiosity. That's my word for growth in the home.
Mhm.
Because there is nothing the same about the people in my home every day I wake up. They are somehow changed. I have a 4-year-old son and a 5.5-year-old daughter. They are different in some way, shape, or form. Right. There is nothing the same every single day. So if
Yeah.
I'm not open-minded and curious about what the heck's going on, and I'm fixed-minded and I'm assuming that everything's going to be the same, I'm going to get lost. I'm going to get left behind. I'm not going to be able to show up as my best self. So being comfortable with change, being curious towards what change looks like, allows me to show up as a better husband and father every single day, especially on a week like we've had in Louisiana, where my work week got thrown upside down. I had a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old climbing the walls of this house all week long because we got stuck at home. That's a really different phase of growth for me as a father all of a sudden. And I have to be very reactive to that in those moments and say, hey, what does growth need to look like this week for you, Steve, in this role of being a father? So yeah, we could do a whole nother episode around one word, growth, the entire time. But for me, Beth, like the favorite thing I have about it is that growth comes in seasons. It isn't one dimensional. It's multifaceted. And because of that, when we talk about if you ain't growing, you're dying, that whole saying, but at the same time, people hear that and they think growth is this all-encompassing singular thing, when really, because it's multidimensional, when we notice in areas in life we can kind of slow down, that gives us the ability then to speed up in other areas. And it's all these different moving parts. And growth is so multidimensional that it gives us that ability to always be growing in some capacity.
But I think, and we can end on this, because I think this is one of the critical things is growth is at the pace that it is. You can't just start college and then, oh man, I think I get this. And then 2 days later, graduate. You have to grow into these roles and talk about potential. Stepping into your potential is a lifelong pursuit. And so how important is it that we can be aggressive, maybe more assertive than aggressive, but at the same time patient, because you end up jumping into stuff you ought not jump into just because you want to jump into something. True?
Yeah, true. Absolutely. And again, that's the beauty of potential, is that if we're growing towards potential, we're looking at it as a lifelong journey. And so we're a lot more patient about that, because, we're not going to, if we look at it from the beginning of week to the end of the week, we're going to struggle to see any difference. When we look at it over 10 years, I'd like to believe that we're like, wow, that's a whole different version of me from 10 years ago. That's incredible. That's amazing. But then you have, again, going back to the example of this past week and being a father, I like to believe that I'm in control, but I'm not. I'm just not. And growth will happen in such a variety of different ways. And where I can have some control, I try to obviously do my best to assert it. And typically the only real control I have over growth is the one inwardly on myself.
Right.
But then when it comes to all these different folks around you, like, crazy sons and daughters, and a wife that's got a career and all her own responsibilities, you go, that I can't control any of that. I have to just be responsive to that and find a way to adapt to that as it grows too.
Well, I think these are great topics. I think realizing our potential is, I think, something that we can all really park our car there and say, and like you said, you're a man of faith, so am I. Pray about it, think about it, dream about it, and don't just dream about the next step. Really think about who can I become? And I like to say, this is your life. Are you who you want to be? Are you going where you want to go? And if you're not, the only person who can change that is you.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. And I always love to tell people, like, when it comes to growth, it's not waiting for you. Like, it's happening. But the best decision you can make is just to hop on board and go with it. Don't fight it.
And hold on tight.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Steve is available at growthready.com. He's got podcasts. He's got a book. The book is Shock the World. And that's the book, right?
That's right. You got it.
Okay. Shock the World. I love the title because, we all want to think that, that's what we're going to do in our world. Right. He's an executive coach. He's also a leadership mentor. So he deals with everybody at all levels. So he's available on his website and can be watched. You've got a lot of good stuff to go watch. A lot of good interviews, podcasts. So I
appreciate it.
You could go back and watch a lot of the interviews that he's done with people and learn from all those, because there's just a world of information out there that people are putting out now that we can maximize and learn from. It's better than, some of the other optional things on TV.
I love it. And again, Beth, I just appreciate the time with you. I love that there's people like ourselves trying to do the work that we're doing in this little town, Baton Rouge, and putting it on the map. And just appreciate your time and the opportunity to join you today.
Well, Steve, have a great weekend. Snow, go melt and be warm again. And thank you again for joining me. And we will definitely talk again soon.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.